You can have you.
Main event of the evening.
Ready to race to you.
These days are
Hello and welcome to These Days Are Ours, a Happy Days podcast. I'm Peter.
And I'm Joe.
And today we will be discussing Season 6, Episode 18, Ralph versus Potsie.
Okay, Peter, tell us what happens in Ralph versus Potsie.
We open with Jody and the rest of the Jefferson High cheerleading squad practicing a cheer at Arnold's for some reason.
You got him on the run, you got him in the spin, so grab that ball and win.
With 2 hours before the game, they leave for Jefferson High. Fonzie arrives for a 10-minute lunch break. He's tuning up a bookmobile and doesn't want to keep the librarians waiting. He does have enough time to get snippy with Al for not putting parsley on his plate, though.
There is no parsley on this plate.
Oh, I'm sorry, I forgot.
And not the canned kind. My body needs fresh.
Richie shows up and joins Fonzie. He has great news. He's working at the Milwaukee Shoppers News. Sure, he's not getting paid, but writing the Ask Aunt Fanny advice column will be a great experience, and a lot of people are going to read it.
It's an advice to the Lovelorn column.
I knew that.
And I'm Aunt Fanny.
It's only for a couple of weeks. Aunt Fanny is in Mexico getting a divorce. One letter Richie received is from a wife whose husband liked to show off at parties by eating dog biscuits. Richie advises her to let her husband have his fun.
And check him for fleas once a month.
Another letter from a dateless girl is taken by Fonzie, who says he'll handle it.
Yeah, that's more or less the advice I gave her. Fonz, one favor. Don't tell anybody, okay?
Humble. I love humble.
Aunt Fanny said she'd fire Richie if he said anything. Then he goes to phone in his deadline in Fonzie's office. Ralph and Potsie enter. Ralph wearing a blue bathrobe. Potsie is annoyed at Ralph for not making lunch, and Ralph protests that he was looking for the shower head. Potsie reveals that he had stolen it earlier, and refuses to give it back unless Ralph returns his lava lamp.
Forget it. I'll just go home and take a nice long bath. Oh yeah? Without water?
As they keep bickering, Fonzie stops them. They admit they've been fighting a lot, and need a referee. Since they need advice, Fonzie suggests they ask Aunt Fanny. Back at the Cunningham house, Marion is making Joni a dress out of a hand-me-down from Cousin Phyllis, who they consistently refer to as Fat Phyllis, much to Joni's annoyance.
Why do I have to wear one of Fat Phyllis's dresses?
Dear, your cousin Phyllis is not fat.
Richie arrives, and then Howard, who is angry that Marion wrote a letter to Aunt Fanny about Howard cheating on his diet by hiding Tootsie Rolls in his cash register and claiming that they're rolls of dirty nickels.
You have made me the laughing stock of the whole neighborhood.
Not for long. Wait till they get a load of this dress.
Marion assures Howard that she didn't write that letter, although it doesn't change the fact that everyone at the hardware store was making fun of Howard when he left. As Joni runs upstairs so Marion can't do anything else with the dress, Howard says Aunt Fanny is full of malarkey. Richie claims to have read the column and found good advice in it. Howard reads a letter from a troubled twosome who used to get along, but now constantly fight and don't know where to draw the line.
Now there is a young couple that desperately needs help.
I think you'll find that answer very helpful.
In Howard's opinion, Fanny's advice could do more harm than good. Cut to the troubled twosome.
The gruesome twosome.
Ralph and Potsie. They stop arguing as they wait for the news with Aunt Fanny's advice, and manage to exaggeratedly get along.
I think I'll clean up, Potts. I mean, you made the din-din.
Thank you, Malph.
You're welcome.
Until Chachi shows up to collect the rent for his mother, and this time, she doesn't want it all in pennies. He also brought their mail. They refuse to tip him, and carry him out the door.
Thanks for the lift.
Bye.
Once they're alone, they read Aunt Fanny's advice. She says they don't know where to draw the line.
Draw it down the middle of the room.
Sure enough, they tape a line down the middle of the room, and then start bickering over who gets what side. Ralph gets the side with the door that leads outside, but Potsie gets the side with the bathroom. The next morning, Potsie is extra cheerful because he got the bedroom all to himself.
What a gorgeous day!
While Ralph, who slept on his half of the couch with a basketball as a pillow, is less so. He tries to fake sleepwalking so he can go to the bathroom,
Don't bother me, I'm sleepwalking.
then offers Potsie anything from his side of the room in exchange. Potsie says Aunt Fanny didn't say anything about trading, so they flip a coin for it. Fortunately for Ralph's bladder, he wins. A week later at Arnold's, Chachi interrupts Fonzie's date with a librarian to complain that he hasn't had a good night's sleep ever since Ralph and Potsie took Aunt Fanny's advice. They've only been fighting even more.
Day and night, almostly night.
What a misuse of darkness.
And Fonzie decides to take matters into his own hands. At dinner time at the Cunningham house, Marion serves an appetizer, apple surprise. She read in Aunt Fanny that a wife should serve something completely different to brighten up her family's meal.
And now for something completely different.
Fonzie arrives, having just renewed his library card, and pulls Richie aside for a conference regarding the troubled twosome.
Somebody's aunt is on thin ice.
Back at the apartment, Ralph and Potsie are bickering once more.
You can't come in. The door's on my side of the room. So what? I traded you one shower for one coming in the door. And you used it up this morning. What do you... Malph, you better not close that.
Ralph grabs a drink from Potsie's fridge as Potsie climbs in the window, which Potsie trades for one use of the stove. Ralph still won't let him on his side, so Potsie tries to throw his TV dinner in. He misses.
Oh, look! I found a TV dinner on my side of the room.
The phone on Ralph's side rings, and he answers it, claiming it's from a gorgeous-sounding girl. He wheedles two nights in the bed from Potsie, who answers it, only to discover it was just a wrong number.
I've had it with you. Come on, put him up, come on. If you're gonna threaten me, do it from your own side of the room.
They're about to come to blows when there's a knock at the door. It's Richie, who asks why they do a stupid thing like divide their room. The answer? Because Aunt Fanny told him to.
That woman has a big mouth.
As both of them try to tempt Richie to their side, Richie calls the both to stand on the line, since it's neutral territory. As Richie tries to confess that he's Aunt Fanny, Fonzie shows up and reveals it for Richie.
Have you told him you're Aunt Fanny yet?
Richie apologizes for giving out bad advice, saying that he was trying to impress his editor, and from now on he'll be much more careful about what he puts in print. Ralph and Potsie start to argue over whether to forgive Richie or not, only to be stopped by Fonzie.
Grandma Nussbaum always told me you got a problem. There is nothing like going for a warm, soft bowling ball. You get my drift?
They have two options, use communication, or Fonzie will beat them up. As Richie and Fonzie are about to leave, Richie asks why Ralph and Potsie wrote to Aunt Fanny in the first place, and learns someone suggested it. As he wonders
Who'd be dumb enough to do a thing like that?
Fonzie drags him outside. The next day at the Cunningham house, we see that Marion turned Phyllis's dress into new curtains, an apron for herself, a tie for Howard, a vest for Richie, a dress and hair ribbon for Joni, a tablecloth, and a scarf for Fonzie.
I am filled with appreciation.
Thank you so much, Peter. That was Ralph versus Potsie, which first aired back on January 23rd, 1979. That night, ABC reran the quiz show episode of Laverne and Shirley. Happy Days and Laverne and Shirley were followed by President Carter's State of the Union Address, which ran on all the networks.
Our children who will be born this year will come of age in the 21st century. What kind of society, what kind of world are we building for them?
Meanwhile, opposite Happy Days, CBS aired a report about strife-torn Iran, anchored by Walter Cronkite.
And another thing, they don't even give you your own office. I have to sit here in the middle of the studio with these idiots in the background.
And NBC aired an hour of the 1976 movie Midway, starring Charlton Heston, Henry Fonda, Robert Mitchum, and more. It's a historical drama about the Battle of Midway Island during World War II.
Now, Midway, the most incredible feeling of combat you will ever experience in a motion picture theater, as Universal surrounds you with the sights, sounds, and actual sensations of battle.
So, Peter, of those three choices, what are you watching?
Well, as fun as it sounds to watch 1 hour of a movie, I'd probably just watch Happy Days.
I probably would too. Ralph vs. Potsie was directed by Jerry Paris, and it was written by Michael Lohman. He had just written Smokin' Ain't Cool the previous week. As for guest stars this week, there are none credited. The actress playing Trudy the Librarian is not listed in the credits. She has no lines. Peter, did you have any thoughts about Trudy the Librarian?
She didn't really get to do much, but I appreciate that she proves that librarians can in fact be sexy and have sex lives.
Another stereotype busted by Happy Days.
Stereotype busted!
As for songs this week, Howard sings a bit of Toot Toot Tootsie Goodbye.
Toot Toot Tootsie Goodbye.
This was originally written in 1922 for the Broadway show Bombo and performed by Al Jolson.
Toot Toot Tootsie Goodbye. Toot Toot Tootsie Don't Cry.
Potsie sings This Is the Way We Brush Our Teeth to the tune of Here We Go Round the Mulberry Bush. It's an English folk song of unknown origin with many sets of lyrics.
This is the way we brush our teeth, brush our teeth, brush our teeth. This is the way we brush our teeth early in the morning.
As for cultural and historical references this week, Fonzie asks why Popeye eats spinach.
Why does Popeye eat spinach?
The cartoon sailor debuted in the comic strip Thimble Theater in 1929, but he started eating spinach in his animated cartoons from the Fleischer Studios, starting in 1933.
I am what I am on account of I eat me spinach.
The United States was suffering through the Great Depression at that time, and the government promoted spinach as an iron-rich food. It turns out that the iron content in spinach had been highly overestimated, possibly due to a mathematical error. For the record, the parsley that Fonz eats is rich in vitamins A, C, and K and can promote bone health, protect eyesight, and even help prevent cancer. So if you're at a restaurant and they serve you a sprig of parsley on the side, make sure to eat it. The Milwaukee Shopper's News is fictional, as is Ask Aunt Fanny, but advice columns go back to the year 1690. The earliest known example appeared in a British newspaper called the Athenian Mercury. Advice columns are often attributed to older women, regardless of who actually writes them, so the columnists have become known as agony aunts in England.
Unlikely agony aunt letters.
Dear Deirdre, I heard that there is a way to get red wine out of carpets. Please tell me, because I really want some red wine.
Peter, are you a big reader of advice columns?
Not terribly. Although I will say that Reddit, am I the asshole, kind of scratches the same itch. The promise of anonymity and getting people to listen to your problems and maybe just straight up telling you if what you're doing is wrong. Or you can just read what other people have to say and get some schadenfreude / horror from it.
Other people's problems are always interesting, and I think they're always going to be interesting. Richie mentions that Ed Sullivan parlayed a newspaper column into his own TV show, which is true.
I'd go syndicated and make my own TV show. Who knows? It happened to Ed Sullivan.
Sullivan started in the newspaper industry in 1919, reporting on both news and sports. Eventually, he landed his own column in the New York Daily News called Little Old New York, in which he concentrated on Broadway shows and celebrity gossip. That column was syndicated to papers across the country, and in 1948, CBS hired Ed to host a weekly variety show, originally called Toast of the Town, but later renamed The Ed Sullivan Show.
I suppose in the 18-year history of our show, we've never had any star who's won such affectionate acceptance as our little Italian mouse, Topo Gigio.
So what did you think of Richie's Ed Sullivan impression?
This is Richie Cunningham. Right here on our stage tonight, we have the entire population of Belgium with their pets.
I don't know a lot about what Ed Sullivan sounds like, but I have a vague enough idea that it could have been worse.
Ed Sullivan impressions were very, very common in the 1950s and 60s.
I was driving a truck. Really, I used to make the guys laugh doing an impression of Ed Sullivan.
You want to bring that truck over here? That's your truck. You want to back that truck up and bring that truck? Oh, that's his truck? He's over there? Oh, fine, you know.
And I would have to say Richie's is not exceptionally accurate, but as we've seen in other episodes, Richie is not much of an impressionist, even though he keeps trying.
You know Ralph, Malph.
Few of us are. Fonzie sarcastically calls Richie Mr. Broadway.
Mr. Broadway.
This was a 1933 film written by and starring Ed Sullivan. In the film, Sullivan plays a fictionalized version of himself traveling around to New York nightclubs to meet celebrities, including Jack Benny, Burt Lahr, and Jack Haley. And Peter, I tried to find a copy of Mr. Broadway, an entire movie starring Ed Sullivan, but I could not find it.
It's been scrubbed from existence? That's a shame.
It is. I think the world needs to see the acting chops of Ed Sullivan. Richie mentions the entire population of Belgium. Circa 1960, when this story is taking place, the entire population of Belgium would have been over 9.1 million people.
Firstly, I am not a bloody little frog. I am a bloody little Belgian.
Today, it's 11.6 million. Potsie demands that Ralph give him back his lava lamp.
I drank a lava lamp. It wasn't lava.
These devices, which consist of wax heated by an incandescent bulb within a glass vessel, were not even invented until 1963 and not marketed as lava lamps until 1965. They peaked in popularity in the late 1960s. So I wonder how Ralph and Potsie ever got their hands on a lava lamp.
They're ahead of their time.
I guess so. They were pioneers. I thought bookmobiles were a relatively recent invention.
Al, listen, I got 10-minute lunch. I'm tuning up a bookmobile.
They go back to the 1800s in both England and America. Their original purpose was to distribute books and therefore information to rural areas that might not otherwise have access to libraries. During his argument with Ralph, Potsie is seen reading Modern Maturity. This magazine has been published by the AARP since 1958 and is now known as AARP the magazine. Chachi says that his mother doesn't want the rent in pennies, which prompts a lame joke about Lincoln from Potsie.
Oh, by the way, my mother sent me down to collect the rent. This time, she doesn't want it all in pennies.
She have something against Lincoln?
Abraham Lincoln first started appearing on pennies in 1909 to mark what would have been Lincoln's 100th birthday.
That's why I'm on your penny.
The newspaper that Ralph and Potsie read is incredibly generic. The nameplate on the front page just says header. So this week, obviously, the Paramount prop department was not knocking themselves out. The trope of dividing a room into two with a line was used in a 1951 episode of I Love Lucy called Men Are Messy. It was also used in a 1973 episode of The Brady Bunch called My Brother's Keeper, and a bunch of other sitcoms.
You stay on your side and I'll stay on my side.
I have never seen this done by anybody in real life. Have you, Peter?
I have not. I think that's kind of the central joke of the episode. Richie thinks that, yes, obviously this will work. And it doesn't work at all. Partially because it's a bad idea, and partially because Ralph and Potsie are very dumb.
Those are contributing factors. I think this is something that they only do in sitcoms and cartoons, but it does lead to some funny situations. There is a poster in Ralph and Potsie's apartment advertising Seeger's Meerschaum's tobacco. Meerschaum is a clay-like mineral used to make pipes. The name means sea foam in German. As for Seeger's, all I can find is that they sold tobacco in the 1860s and 1870s. Very little of the company survives today, except for tobacco storage jars with the logo, and you can find those on eBay if you're willing to shell out the money.
I bought on eBay.
Other observations this week, well, Peter, it is official. Scott Baio is now a full-time cast member of Happy Days with his picture in the opening credits and everything. His NBC series, Who's Watching the Kids, had been canceled a month earlier. Did you notice that Scott had been added to the opening credits this week?
I did. Goody, goody gumdrops.
I'm not sure why one of the cheerleaders has a sweater that says Jefferson High Bucks, while everyone else just has a big J.
Maybe it was like a hand-me-down from an older sibling who attended years ago when it was a different design.
That is an excellent idea. I had not even thought about that. And in your summary of the episode, you pointed out how odd it was that the cheerleaders would even be practicing at Arnold's, which is the middle of a restaurant and not a place where cheerleaders would be practicing at all.
At the very least, practice outside. People are trying to eat.
I've gotten so used to Arnold's now being a community center that it doesn't even faze me when cheerleaders practice in the middle of it, or when there's political debates or other kinds of things that you wouldn't have in the middle of a restaurant. Al's line, "I'll stick to spinach," is another contender for the most obvious dubbed dialogue in Happy Days history.
I'll stick to spinach.
They're keeping that tradition of bad ADR going into season 6. And we'll have to talk a little bit about Cousin Phyllis. Is Cousin Phyllis supposed to be 8 feet tall? Possibly 9?
The Cousin Phyllis B-plot is just really gross and mean-spirited and uncomfortable, and it doesn't help that the dress that apparently used to belong to her has a hemline that would only make sense if she was a giant.
Well, that's how I actually pictured her. I pictured her as being Giganta.
Your 50 feet of good are now matched by my 50 feet of evil.
That actually made this cringy subplot a little bit more palatable. Fonzie consistently says library and librarian in this episode.
You know, I just renewed my library card.
Do you think that was a conscious choice by Henry Winkler?
Yeah, it must have been either him or the director, because Henry Winkler himself, he has a very different background from Fonzie. He is not working class, so I assume that pronouncing it library and librarian was a deliberate choice on his part, which is kind of laying it on a little bit thick there, Mr. Winkler.
Yeah, I thought he was kind of overdoing it with that. And out of morbid curiosity, I attempted to decipher what the person on the other end of the phone was saying during the wrong number scene. When slowed way down, it just sounds like a telephone operator reading phone numbers. So it was definitely not worth the time that I invested in doing that. So, Peter, were there any outstanding Happy Days fashions in this episode?
I loved Richie's vest in the tag. It's this pink floral patterned thing made from the dress, and it looks really, really nice. It's just got a really nice cut, and I would love to wear a vest like that.
The Cousin Phyllis subplot is probably the weakest element of this episode, but it did lead to one good thing. It led to that vest. I don't think that justifies the entire B plot, but that vest does look great on Ron Howard. I hope he kept it after the episode was done. So, Peter, I will ask that age-old timeless question. Was this episode any good?
If it wasn't for the Cousin Phyllis B plot, I think this would be one of my favorite episodes of the season. And it might end up still being one of my favorite episodes of the season, because the A plot of Ralph and Potsie being dumbasses who take bad advice and somehow make it even worse is incredibly entertaining to me. I also love the fact that Richie throughout this episode is well-intentioned, but also very dumb, and in his own way, so is Fonzie, because he's the one who told Ralph and Potsie to write it to Richie for advice, because he had faith that Richie was doing a good job, even though he really should not have, because Richie has no idea what he is doing. This episode was 80% a delight.
I really enjoyed the material about Ralph and Potsie dividing the room in half, and the ridiculous lengths that they go to enforce these stupid rules that they've imposed on themselves. I think a particular highlight is Potsie trying to heat up his TV turkey dinner by throwing it across the room into an oven. And I like that when Richie negotiates a peace treaty between Ralph and Potsie, they have to balance on the line precariously like they are tightrope walkers, apparently forgetting that there's just a regular floor on either side of them and they can just stand normally. And it shows you how these borders that we imagine for ourselves, they can become real to people after a while. There's a point in the episode when Ralph crosses over from one side of the apartment to the other and he says, "It's good to be home," as if he wasn't already home being in this apartment. He had to be on his own side of the apartment. And it shows you how people can become so territorial and small-minded. And I'm always up for Ralph and Potsie dumbassery, and this episode just has plenty of it. And I highly recommend that people check it out when it comes up in reruns or if they're checking out episodes online. So, Peter, how can people stay in contact with us and find out about all the wonderful things that we are doing?
Listeners can follow us on Twitter at Fonzie Podcast. They can follow me on Twitter at Peter Bullfront. That's PETERVULFRANC.
And they can follow me on Twitter at Joe_A_Blevins. They can find this podcast online at thesedaysareours.libsyn.com. And they can email us with questions, comments, and concerns at thesedaysareuspodcast@gmail.com. So, Peter, what do we have on the docket for next time?
Next time, Leather Tuscadero returns in Stolen Melodies.
I'm always excited for another Leather Tuscadero episode, so see you later, alligator.
In a while, crocodile.
Dear Abby, my feet are too long. My hair's falling out and my rights are all wrong. My friends, they all tell me that I've no friends at all. Won't you write me a letter? Won't you give me a call? Signed, Bewildered. Bewildered, bewildered, you have no complaint. You are what you are and you ain't what you ain't. So listen up, Buster, and listen up good. Stop wishing for bad luck and knocking on wood. Signed, Dear Abby.
I'm Aunt Fanny.